Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Amplify Your Business. Today, I'm going to be talking to Kael Nicholson. He is the COO of Beamdog, which is a gaming company here in Edmonton. So they're creating some really cool games. Just released, I think, what would you call it? A pre-beta version, Kael? Of,
early access version is usually what we call it, yeah.
Okay. Well, instead of me trying to explain what the heck you guys are doing over there, give me a little bit of rundown as to what Beamdog is all about, I guess, and what you guys try to accomplish there.
Sure, yeah, I'd love to, Lance. So Beamdog's been around for about 13 years. I think we just passed our 13th anniversary. It was founded by two of the founders of BioWare, Trent Oster and Cam Topher. And it was founded originally to do games distribution, but they quickly found their way into porting of a lot of the sort of classic BioWare titles like Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights, and that occupied most of the last sort of decade of their work. So around 3 years ago, I think I joined the company, and we took on the project of building our new IP, MythForce, which is a first-person roguelike kind of dungeon hack game, inspired by 80s cartoons and sort of in that artistic style.
Yeah.
We recently released that April 20th. We released that into early access on the Epic Store, and that's been sort of the meat and potatoes of what we've been doing recently.
Yeah, so for those of you who loved the 80s cartoons, you're going to absolutely love the artwork in this, because that's one of the things that just was striking when I saw some of you guys' marketing, and then obviously some of the cover design and so on that you have. So for those who are listening, if you loved like He-Man, if you can think back to those days, this is going to be complete nostalgia for you, for sure. It's pretty cool stuff.
And nostalgia has been kind of a key word. We really wanted to kind of recreate that feeling of sitting in a sunbeam on a Saturday morning with a bowl of sugary cereal watching your favorite cartoons.
Yeah, and I'm sure you guys have done a great job of capturing that. And so walk us through, because there's a lot of people on this, who are watching this right now probably, who don't understand how the gaming industry works and what it takes and what that timeline is in terms of coming up with an idea for a game to actually having something that is completely published, and sort of explaining, I guess, the step that you're in right now, and then what steps are yet to come in order for that to be a fully accessible game and so on.
Sure, yeah. So, I mean, games, like a lot of creative products, usually start in some kind of conception phase. So there's some portion of kind of research or world building or writing or art that occurs initially to try and coalesce an idea. And that often happens at the same time as, like market analysis would in sort of a regular product cycle. So we do kind of, NPV and product analysis and try and assess the value of various things. But a lot more of our kind of project selection and variability is driven by what we're passionate about, what we think we can deliver, what the company's strengths are. So there's a conception phase, then generally there's sort of a pre-production phase where we try and establish all the means by which we'll do things. So the technology we'll use, the art style, the structure, the kind of design we'll set up. We'll do sort of design documents, much as you would on any other software project. Okay. And then once you've sort of solved a lot of those problems, we go into production. That's kind of the meat and potatoes, the bulk of a project. In terms of how the business works, generally a developer will partner with a publisher, and the publisher will fund the title and perform a lot of sort of the marketing and supplementary activities such as customer service, let's say, or translation. And the developer will focus entirely on sort of making the game. And then, there's some kind of 50-50 or 60-40 split or some variant thereof that happens, often with some kind of completion bond or minimum guarantee of sales or something to that effect in that relationship. So generally, developers are looking to publishers to help them fund those games with capital, and then the publishers sort of, de-risk it by adding all those additional services, and then you split the profits.
Okay.
So that's sort of the traditional model. What was strange about this one is that we went most of the way alone, actually. We had a publisher for a little while on the project, and then at the very end, now that we've been acquired by another company, they're sort of acting as our publisher, but a lot of it was sort of us, white knuckling the funding ourselves, out there hustling all the time, trying to find money.
And was that out of design or out of necessity?
A little bit of both. We've never been in love with the way this industry is, because it can be sometimes quite usurious from the publisher perspective. It can be sort of difficult to get the value from your title. that you sort of warrant. And we have some experience self-publishing because all of the existing legacy titles, the D&D titles, the Baldur's Gate stuff, we've been kind of publishing ourselves, right? Distributing and selling and marketing. So we have some experience in that area. So we're not, I would say, afraid to engage in that. And that was kind of the plan for quite a long time on this newest title, on this new IP. But it's difficult to hit the scope and scale that a large organization or publisher can give you, particularly when it comes to just connections. Some of the publishers we worked with had amazing distribution markets globally that we simply could not access as a small Edmonton firm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
even though the founders have been involved with huge success in terms of big gaming companies now, BioWare, which is EA now, even though they had all of those background connections, it still is difficult from a publishing standpoint.
Oh, for sure, yeah, and we've had we're very lucky to have Trent and Cam on board because they have a wealth of experience in that sort of space, and they've both been on board for what are essentially billion-dollar games. Mass Effect, Dragon Age, those are both huge titles with multiple games and a massive following. The cultural impact of those things, I can't walk down the street without seeing someone wearing an N7 hoodie or some kind of Mass Effect merch. It's a huge monolithic kind of enterprise, and BioWare was one of the really wonderful sort of success stories in our industry.
Yeah.
So having that experience on board has been invaluable to us.
Yeah. So I'm really curious, as the chief operating officer there, when you're thinking through how to manage your team in the development of something that has such a long runway, because I think you were saying before we hit the record button that you're in about year 3 or so right now.
Mm-hmm.
But before it's like fully published, you got another year probably in front of you. So the timeline for this project is 4 years. So you have a team that's been working on something for 4 years without it actually, it's now just starting to see the light of day, right? And so that's going to be interesting from an operational standpoint on just managing the staff, keeping the morale up, as you're still trying to figure out all the other aspects of, like, do we have a buyer at the end of this? Can we get this thing published? Can we get it distributed and so on, right? Like, walk me through some of those nuances of project managing and managing the team on something of that kind of scale and duration.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's a very interesting problem in our industry in particular because of sort of the creative challenges that exist in this game. I spent years and years and years building software for the web or business clients, et cetera. And it's a very different experience. I'd say, first off, we're quite lucky in that the games industry is a bit strange with staff because it's one of the first companies I've ever worked for where everyone was really plugged in and turned on and engaged. People in this industry want to be here. They want to be here badly. There's a lot of applicants for every job we post. A lot of people want to even get their foot in the door in games. So it's, you don't really have this problem with sort of disengagement or people kind of phoning it in. Everyone is here and they're here to work and they're passionate about it. So that's a wonderful place to start as a, senior management. But you really do have to manage those things like culture and engagement and buy-in actively over the course of a 4-year project, right? It's so easy to sort of lose the plot when you're kind of world building and you're in all these little caves and tunnels, especially over the COVID quarantine. It's been much more isolating and much more sort of siloed, I would say. We have some wonderfully active procedures. We do monthly one-on-ones with all managers and individual on staff, so we try and stay very connected in that sense. We do quarterly employee ENPS scores, so basically employee satisfaction scores, and we make a lot of effort to try and ensure that stuff is assessed and listened to carefully, and that we try and change it and turn it into policy on a regular basis. It's really critical. But it's kind of fascinating. When COVID hit, we tended to see large themes in the NPS scores. So people would all be kind of talking about 1 or 2 or 3 topics. It's all about compensation, or it's all about vacation, or it's all about work performance or something like that. And then once COVID hit, we'd see 50 or 60 issues. None of them sort of terrible or troubling, but it was such a more individualized experience for everyone. Everyone was kind of siloed and having their own conception and experience of work that it really kind of disintegrated that feedback. So that was a really fascinating challenge to deal with. But I'd say generally we've spent a lot of time focused on things like internal communication and culture. How do we continue to not only talk about the game with everyone, but the company?
Yeah.
Using things like we have what we call a show and know on Fridays, which is kind of a show and tell for all the groups to show off the work they've done. The artists will show their art. The developers might show some neat new function or code or feature they've built. The writers might read off some VO lines or tell a story about some new plot point. It's a really great opportunity for everyone to kind of get together and look at the game and stay kind of focused on that vision.
Yeah. It's so key, I would think, right?
Yeah, I was surprised by how much of that was sort of necessary, but with a project this large, and the project team is about, I'd say right now, about between 55 and 60 people. So it's a relatively large team. We employ agile methodologies primarily. Right now, we're working in a kind of a blend of Scrum and Kanban. We have certain teams running Scrum models. We have certain teams running Kanban models. The teams that work in more kind of a service area where there's work coming in, there's requests of them to do things from the other teams, use sort of a flow Kanban model. So they model the work in progress and they can sort of process things in their own time. Whereas the rest of the team, because they're really tied to those milestones and feature sets, and especially now that the game is out there with the public and we've got a published roadmap and expectations and commitments, we have to be very careful about trying to deliver on those things in a timely fashion. So the rest of the teams work on sort of a 2 to 3 week Scrum cycle, depending on where they are in the organization. Yeah. We have about 6 or 7 teams now that work kind of independently of one another, and we have coordination through a variety of sort of different agile techniques that allow us to both coordinate, but more importantly, I think, to pivot to the most important priorities of the day, because they can be ever changing, really. I mean, in games, you build something you plan to build and you play it and it's not fun. And so you need to pivot right away and find out what is fun and how it's fun and what else could be fun, and how maybe 2 things that weren't meant to interact are interacting, and what that's doing to your game. It's a kind of a weird alchemy at times.
Yeah, it's totally unique, right, to what you guys are doing there. Now, one thing that, just staying on the topic of HR and the people part of the business, I know before we hit the record button, you were talking about how when you joined, the team was around that 20 to 30, or it had begun to grow anyway, from 20, I think, into 30, and then you really had to explode it up into, I think you were saying, close to 80 people over a very short window of time, as you were really trying to expand the capacity of the team. That growth explosion, I mean, that's difficult to manage. So tell me some of the challenges that you had with that and how you overcame those challenges, just so that other people who are listening who maybe are faced with some rapid growth within their businesses, where they can maybe avoid making some mistakes that maybe you had to make because you didn't know any better or whatever, or just some tips along the way here that you were able to develop.
Sure. Yeah. I think the most important thing for managing a scale up of that nature and size is that you get really clear on what the business is and what it wants to do. You have to really understand what your mission is, what your vision is, what your values are. I think probably the first exercise that to put the company through after joining was to try and discern and develop our value set. And that's proven to be a really necessary guiding light as we've progressed, and not just sort of a thing that we put on the wall and point out every once in a while and say we're about finding the fun, or we're about embracing adventure, or we're about agency through accountability, but finding real ways to integrate those things into your day-to-day process, procedures, hiring, firing, performance assessment, etc. When we interview people, we do kind of an initial screening interview. We do more of a sort of a technical or performance interview to assess kind of their skill set and their capabilities. And then finally, we do a third values interview that's just to assess kind of whether they're a fit value-wise for the company. You have a saying that sort of, we believe in diversity in all things except values. Because when we get people that sort of think about things the same way, at least in terms of what's important, like vis-a-vis quality, vis-a-vis creativity, vis-a-vis collaboration, it's when you get real differences in those perspectives that we see a lot of friction, a lot of toxicity.
Yeah. Yeah.
So by keeping
Yeah.
those kind of uniform, it's been hugely helpful to kind of keep a vibrant culture.
So you mentioned that you do things within the business, within the organization, to kind of impart that throughout. So can you give me an example of a value and that you guys hold, and then how you make sure that that is reinforced throughout then, I guess the workday, or throughout the course of the work that your employees are doing?
Sure. Yeah. What would be a good example? I mean, one of the ones we use, I think, most frequently is kind of a funny one that we call "eat the cake," which is meant to be. It's from something one of our sort of founders said, but it's meant to be sort of, um, a lot of people in games have this funny way of getting the blinders on, where they kind of drill in on a task and they kind of work on their piece of the thing, and they really don't look at the whole, or they forget to kind of understand that, like we over engineer things sometimes, or we'll design something that's just a little too intricate. And eating the cake is about sort of making sure that you're kind of keeping perspective, that you're tasting what you're cooking, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So just like, because people will they'll make the mix, they'll stir the spoon, they'll pat the thing out, they'll bake the cake, and they'll forget to taste it. They'll
Yeah.
do all the sort of mechanical things but forget what it's about. And that means, I think, understanding that it's always going to be a product for users to enjoy, right? Not just sort of a technical challenge or an artistic challenge, but at the end of the day, it's about making someone happy, or making someone feel, or making someone have an experience, and not to lose sight of that. So it's about sort of testing, vetting, and making sure you work your things through. So a lot of our kind of day-to-day procedures are constructed around ensuring that that kind of thing happens. A lot of our sort of testing is constructed around that. We tend to really empower our testers, where a lot of the time in the industry, they're kind of low man on the totem pole. We do really try and make sure they've got a strong voice and the ability to kind of hit the button, if you will, hit the stop the assembly line with a red lever at the end and say, nope, this isn't hitting quality, we're not going out with it. And a lot of times that perspective gets bowled over in the industry, which you can tell from the number of bugs we see in games today.
Yeah.
So trying to really invest in them and grow that team out is, I think, a good example of kind of eating the cake in that context.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really great example for sure. Now, I'm really curious though, in terms of the recruitment. You'd mentioned that it's not that difficult to find eager people. There's multiple applicants, for every position that you post, and I can see the appeal, right? I know a lot of people that want to be in the gaming industry from the design and animation side of things and so on, because that's, we brush into that. Up against that with some of our animation work and the people that we recruit. For a lot of them have that passion to be in game, and then they didn't, for whatever reason, it didn't work out that way, and so then they're working in the marketing side of things, which is great because we need them too. but I'm just curious, because I mean, there's so many huge studios out there and small studios all over the place. So it's a global marketplace that you're competing against, I would imagine, especially once COVID hit. It probably distributed that workforce, and everybody figured out processes and systems to be able to have people working remotely as well. So is that something that is it because of the culture that you have? Like, what is it that is drawing people to your business, to Beamdog, as opposed to some of the competitive ones around the world that also have other advantages, and great things going on with their operations?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Lance, and you're absolutely correct in your assumption about sort of the globalization of talent. It's been harder to find good talent in some ways and easier to find good talent in other ways.
Yeah.
And we've seen some particular roles in an organization that are particularly valuable, like some senior production staff, where the wages have scaled 20-30% from where they were a year ago even. Just as that sort of demand has grown, and as that sort of fungibility, but kind of as the need for co-location has decreased.
Yeah.
And you can kind of do anything from anywhere, and those systems, as you say, are getting built to allow that. There are roles that are always really easy for us to find. especially in a place like Edmonton, where we have an amazing pool of engineering talent. It's never hard for us to find good developers. They may not be incredibly, skillful game developers yet, but there's just an amazing level of talent out there for young junior developers, kids coming out of the programs, and NAIT and U of A especially. We find gems there all the time, that we sort of try and invest in and burnish up to become great game developers. Roles we found much harder recently to fill are things like VFX. VFX artists have been really challenging. We spent maybe 5-6 months trying to search out one, with active recruitment and headhunting even. And there are always a few unicorns in game development as well. There's 2 or 3 roles that are hard to find and fill because they're in such high demand and it's such a weird skill set. For example, technical artists are a really, really challenging hire because they are one of those kind of right brain, left brain groups. They really do have to understand kind of the aesthetics and the sort of world of art and how to speak that language and work in that space, and artists, and understand that sort of creative need, but also have kind of an analytical engineering mindset and constructing tools and solving those kinds of problems. So it's a very challenging and very rare kind of individual that can fit that role. And they're hard to find. They're really hard to find always for us. And when, we used to compete with, BioWare in town here, and Improbable, now Inflection in town, and a few, studios kind of in the city and in Calgary. And now we compete with, Amazon and Google and Apple and all these other organizations, because it's really kind of flattened out in post-COVID world.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what is also really interesting too is that you're seeing these giants really push hard into the gaming space as well, right? Like, so you mentioned Amazon and Google with their Stadia, right? Is that what they call it?
Stadia was their cloud service, yeah.
Yeah, cloud service, and I'd imagine they must have a development team that's trying to develop games for that as well. I don't know, but I'm guessing that there must be something that's going on in that space. Microsoft is just gobbling up gaming companies. It seems like massive ones is what they're gobbling up. Maybe smaller ones too.
Well, yeah, recently, I mean, they went through sort of a spree of buying smaller ones 2-3 years ago, but I mean, obviously the ones like Bethesda have been on the books lately, and those have been massive acquisitions to sort of fuel their first party stable of developers. It's interesting. We were kind of in that space right now where there's a lot of aggregation and a lot of consolidation of game companies. Sony's been buying a few major sort of contenders. Microsoft, obviously, EA and Activision have always been kind of large. Although Activision, of course, now is closing that deal to be part of Microsoft as well, provided those lawsuits don't take that down. But Embracer, the group that bought us, we liken it kind of to a pirate flotilla. They kind of acquired a lot of little guys, a lot of little indie studios, a lot of little shops like ours, and have built a really interesting kind of network of those places sharing knowledge and sort of cross collaborating on things. So it's kind of an interesting place. It's a bit more bohemian, I think, than being bought by an EA or a Microsoft. But there's a lot of really exciting creativity and dynamism happening in that space, and we're happy to be part of that family.
Yeah. So do you think that these giant companies buying up so much, will that thwart or dampen creativity and innovation? Because in a lot of sense, the big giants are where people go to, where innovation goes to die sometimes, right? So is that gonna or dampen it, or will it actually then create just this explosion of new innovative smaller companies in its wake, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, the industry is in a really interesting place in that context because there is a lot of consolidation happening, but 10-15 years ago, we experienced what we sort of call the indie apocalypse, which is that, the sort of democratization of distribution platforms like Steam, and these digital distribution platforms online, Steam, Epic, allow people to get a game into circulation, into distribution quite simply. Which allowed not only a lot of small developers and 1-person, 2-person shops even to exist, but also a lot of small publishers to exist, where they just go around and find 2 or 3 cool projects they find and fund those things. So we see, I think there's something like 100 games released a day now. It's like it's a massive number of indie titles coming out all the time. So I don't think we're ever going to lose that sort of grassroots creativity. What it has created, I think, is kind of a polarization where there's a lot of titles in that kind of massive, EA, Activision, Bethesda, like they require 20x returns on their investment, and they have to, pass things through the board, and they, FIFA and what have you. And then there's all of this tiny, indie stuff that is, under $5 million kind of per game to make. Sometimes with tiny budgets for people in their basements. Some of the amazing success stories like Minecraft, or Stardew Valley, or Valheim, are these tiny little teams of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, making games that are moving 5, 6, 7 million copies, and they're itty bitty little operations, doing incredibly wonderful creative things, but they're still kind of at that scale. And there's an interesting space in there for that sort of 100-person kind of studio, those people making games that are more around the kind of 15, 20 million. They're not massive. They don't need to sort of 10x their profits. They're not tiny, and they can't sort of just blow out from a 5-man studio, but there's kind of an appetite for that space. I think, games around that kind of $20-$30 price point of premium product.
Yeah. So what do you see as the future then for Beamdog? As you look at that competitive landscape, you look at what's happening. And I know you talked or hinted to there a little bit about that you guys have been purchased, or there's a deal that's going down right now with a Texas company, is it?
Yeah, Aspire Media is the company that's purchasing us through their parent company, Embracer Group.
Okay.
And Aspire is a company out of Austin that have been doing really interesting things in sort of the Mac space for a long time, Mac porting and doing a lot of interesting games there, and have most recently been doing more sort of things in the porting world on Switch and that kind of thing. So they've got a really phenomenal team down there. I think they're probably about 150. I'll probably be totally wrong with that estimate, but they're a relatively large group in Austin, and they've been around for 25 plus years. So they're no spring chickens in this industry. They know what they're doing. Yeah, we've worked together that deal. It's just in heritage review right now, so we're just sort of all awaiting the Canadian government to tell us if we can go forward with it. But that's pretty much done, and the deal is inked.
Cool. And so what does that do in terms of Beamdog's future, and also I'd imagine any type of purchase like that creates some uncertainty, creates opportunity, I'd imagine, as well for the staff, but also some uncertainty. Does that, like, as the COO, how do you manage that, the scariness of change or the resistance to change and all that?
Yeah, we've got a lot of good industry veterans that I think are accustomed to some of this. There's a lot of kind of the main kind of MO of game companies was generally sort of build them up and sell them for a long time, right? That was kind of what you saw most often from the smaller companies, was trying to get enough kind of credibility and skill into your hat to get bought by a large company, per the consolidation we talked about earlier. So I think there were a few veterans that sort of took it in stride and said, yep, that's what happens. Companies get bought, companies get sold. As long as sort of things aren't changing here too badly, I'm going to be fine. But, they can be a little bit pragmatic at times too, and sort of say, I'll be here, but I can get employed elsewhere. But for a lot of our staff are Edmonton-based still. We probably have I'd say it's probably about 50-50 now, in terms of remote staff versus Edmonton staff, although even most of our Edmonton staff are still working remote.
Yeah.
We wanted to be very, very cautious with who we got into bed with on that front. And we wanted to really vet that closely. And that's why I think, just as when we hire a new staff member and try and values assess them, we did a very similar process of dating with the Aspire guys, really making sure that we sort of had philosophies that aligned. I think at one point they sort of sat down and did kind of the Venn diagram of our values and their values, and there was so like 80-90% overlap on kind of all the things we did and said. But we operate in similar ways. We all believe, I think, in very similar business philosophies in terms of organizational structure and leadership. I think we all believe very heavily in models of transformational, authentic leadership in how we run our businesses. I think we believe in the value of people and in empowering sort of the bottom up efforts in a company, right? There's a lot of people that do a lot of things in this company, and they all know how to do those things better than I do. So my job is generally to empower them and get out of their way,
Yeah.
and help those things sort of coordinate well. So um, also, I think a lot about motivation too. You know, a lot of the belief of kind of intrinsic motivation and how you motivate people in this day and age, and how you don't, right? How you don't necessarily incentivize them by throwing money at them or performance scaling them, but rather you help them find something they're fascinated by or purpose in their work, or build a great culture that people want to be a part of and contribute to.
Mm-hmm.
And you just sort of create a space where they can self-motivate.
Yeah, yeah, it is a challenge, right? I mean, there's change constantly, right? There's the only constant is change, as they say,
Mhm.
and yet there's such a resistance that some people have to it, and so it can be really difficult, and so it really comes down to managing that. And so, yeah, it's good that you've been able to do that and build that culture. And like you said, if there's a cultural alignment with that company that you're getting in bed with, and doing all the due diligence there to ensure that that is the case, I can see then you minimize the risks that come with those changes, right? Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
So yeah, back to that question that I asked, and I asked the second one right away, and so you answered the second one with the first one. So what does the future hold for Beamdog then? Do you think is anything going to change because of the purchase? Is there a different way that you're going to, or direction you're going to go on the game development or anything like that, or is it kind of exactly what you guys had in the roadmap?
Yeah, I mean, with a lot of game company purchases too, the rule of thumb is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You
Yeah.
you won't see often a lot of changes happen at companies due to an acquisition unless there is something that's really challenging happening.
Mm.
So we've been operating pretty much autonomously still, coordinating and hopefully sharing a lot of the value of our parent co as well. They've been really wonderful in terms of finding new opportunities for us or giving us access to their sort of channel networks, and their expertise in particular. But I don't think anything's going to change too much for us in the immediate future. One thing that I'm really looking forward to is that now that we have this relationship with both Aspire and Embracer, hopefully project capital will be much easier to find internally, and we won't have to sort of do a lot of that kind of rubber meeting the road to try and find publishers and hustle deals and try and sell people on value. There's obviously always sort of a business case assessment and ROI is happening inside the company as well for that kind of funding. But I think it's much easier to sort of sell that to someone that already understands and sees your value, as opposed to trying to convince publishers who are, also trying to be a bit mercenary and get as much as they can out of every deal.
Yeah, yeah, completely. Well, thank you for peeling the curtain back a bit here on the gaming industry. It's been really interesting for me to get a little bit of a snapshot as to what's going on over there, because it's just a different model than what a lot of businesses are operating within. And so it was really interesting to hear the different way that you approach that. But it was also really refreshing to hear that it's such a people-centric kind of approach that you have as the operations officer there. And so which is key to any business. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to have good people, and we have to have motivated good people that are in there doing the things that we need them to do to succeed and to finish executing on that roadmap, or whatever it is, whether it's creating a game or just getting a project out the door, or managing the customer expectations and so on. So the parallels are very similar. Now, if somebody wanted to get their hands on one of these advanced not edition, so sorry, what did you call it?
The early access copies of the
Early
game.
access
Yep.
copy, there we go, of MythForce. How would they go about doing that? Where do you want to direct them, Kael?
Well, they can go to the Epic Games Store and search for MythForce. Or they can find it on our website as well, beamdog.com. That'll have all the appropriate links, etc., as well as mythforce.com, which will direct you directly to the game site.
Awesome.
So please do try it out. It's a wonderful game, and we're actively looking for feedback and to collaborate with the community on building that game out in the future. So please come be a part of it.
Yeah, totally. Well, thank you again, Kael. I really, truly do appreciate you taking the time today just to give us that look at a different industry than what we've been able to talk to so far. And so I think our audience is going to really find it interesting. And for those of you who are interested in checking out some of our past episodes of Amplify Your Business, just head over to amplifyyourbusiness.ca. And if you prefer to listen to this as opposed to watching it from the website, you can access it in all of the, basically all the major platforms in which you can access podcasts. So just search in your favorite podcast platform for Amplify Your Business and you'll find us there. So until the next episode, everybody have a prosperous day.